In the 19th century, empires didn't just collide, they whispered, schemed, and swallowed entire nations whole without firing a shot. And nowhere was that more chillingly true than in the dusty mountain passes of Afghanistan. At the heart of this conflict was not just a local squabble, but a brewing global rivalry. This wasn't merely a British blunder. It was the opening act of the Great Game, a war that began with whispers of Russian influence in Kabul, ended in a trail of blood that reached all the way to the palaces of Calcutta and the icy courts of St. Petersburg. And in the middle of this deadly chessboard sat the Indian subcontinent, unaware that it was becoming the most fought-over prize of the 19th century. The First Anglo-Afghan War, which raged between 1838 and 1842, wasn't just about Afghanistan, it was about India. It was about the British Empire's paranoia that the Russian bear was marching ever closer to its crown jewel. And so, like a gambler who fears the table is rigged, Britain decided to move first. They convinced themselves that if Afghanistan fell into Russian hands, or even into Russian influence, India would be next. And for the British, losing India wasn't just about losing revenue. It was about losing identity, status, and global power. So, in a show of might cloaked in diplomacy, they decided to unseat the sitting Afghan ruler, Dost Muhammad Khan, and replace him with someone more agreeable. That man was Shah Shuja Durrani, an exiled former king who had no real support in Afghanistan but was willing to wear the crown again if British bayonets helped him hold it. In late 1838, the British amassed a massive expeditionary force composed of over 20,000 soldiers, mostly Indian sepoys led by British officers. These troops didn't march through friendly terrain, they carved their path through desert, rock, and mountain. Supplies were stretched, morale was low, but the goal was clear: remove Dost Muhammad and install a puppet. And in 1839, after a fierce and bloody siege at the fortress city of Ghazni, the British got their way. Kabul fell, Dost Muhammad was captured, Shah Shuja was installed. Mission accomplished. Or so they thought. What followed was a textbook case in how not to hold a foreign country. British officers, flush with premature victory, held parties in Kabul. British wives hosted garden tea sessions. They built bungalows, rode horses, and dressed the city in the illusion of civilization. But behind the walls, in the narrow alleys and mountain shadows, anger festered. The Afghan people never accepted Shah Shuja. They viewed him as a foreign puppet, propped up by invaders. Resentment grew, and it didn't take long for the cracks to become chasms. By late 1841, rebellion erupted. Tribes rose, rallying under Muhammad Akbar Khan, the fierce and tactical son of Dost Muhammad. The British, cut off guard, found themselves surrounded, their supply lines cut. Then came the breaking point. Sir William Macnaghten, the British political envoy, was lured into a false negotiation and publicly assassinated in December 1841. Panic ensued. Elphinstone, the British commander, old and feeble, could do nothing but negotiate a desperate retreat. In January 1842, the British garrison, 4,500 soldiers, and nearly 12,000 camp followers, including women and children, began what was supposed to be a safe march to Jalalabad. But there was nothing safe about it. As they moved through the snow-covered passes of the Hindu Kush, they were ambushed, hunted like animals, and slaughtered. Jazail snipers picked them off from cliffs. Afghan tribes attacked with deadly precision. The cold was merciless, the food was gone, the retreat turned into a massacre. By the end, only one man, Dr. William Brydon, staggered into Jalalabad, barely alive, to tell the tale. When asked where the army was, he said, "I am the army." The British were humiliated. The press back home in London was outraged. Parliament demanded answers, and in Calcutta, the East India Company's rule began to feel fragile. But in Russia, the silence was deafening. They hadn't fired a single shot, but they had exposed Britain's weakness in a way that even a cannon couldn't. The psychological toll was devastating. If a few Russian whispers in Kabul could spark such a disaster, what else could Russia achieve by simply moving its pieces? The British didn't just lose soldiers in Afghanistan, they lost control over the narrative of their invincibility, but they couldn't let it stand. They dispatched a new force, the so-called Army of Retribution. It wasn't just sent to rescue the survivors, it was sent to burn villages, exact vengeance, and restore British pride. And that they did, leveling parts of Kabul, punishing tribes, and making an example out of any resistance. But the damage was done. Afghanistan was a hornet's nest. Shah Shuja was assassinated shortly after, and the British, realizing they couldn't hold the country without bleeding it dry, pulled out by late 1842. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The war fundamentally altered the way Britain viewed the Indian subcontinent. No longer was India just a colony, it was now a fortress. Everything had to be defended, not just militarily, but diplomatically and psychologically. The British began to militarize the frontier, fortify cities, and spread an intelligence network so wide it reached into tribal councils, markets, and border villages. Wherever planted, maps were drawn, alliances were bought and betrayed. India became not just the jewel in the crown, but the crown itself. And Russia? They kept expanding, swallowing Central Asian khanates, inching ever closer to Afghanistan. Every time Russia took a new city, Tashkent, Samarkand, Khiva, the British looked toward the north with increasing dread. And so the Great Game was born, not with a formal declaration or a grand battle, but with a botched invasion and a brutal winter in the Afghan hills. From that moment on, Britain and Russia played a silent war, fought not with armies but with influence, bribes, spies, and proxy kings. Afghanistan became the buffer zone, and India became the prize. And it was the Indian people who paid the price, used as pawns in a global contest they had no part in starting. Indian sepoys fought and died in Afghan passes. Indian taxes funded British retribution. Indian merchants were told what they could trade and where. The subcontinent was ruled not by peace, but by fear. Fear that Russia was coming. The war also shaped internal British policies in India. Every rebellion, every dissent, every act of resistance was seen through the lens of Russian manipulation. When the Indian Rebellion of 1857 erupted, British commanders whispered, perhaps Russia was behind it. Perhaps Russian agents had stirred the pot. The paranoia was now baked into every decision, and in many ways, it still is. The First Anglo-Afghan War didn't just redraw maps. It rewired minds. It changed the way empires thought, planned, and fought. It showed that psychological warfare could be just as powerful as physical force. It proved that India was not safe, and it exposed the terrifying reality that an empire, no matter how vast, could be crippled by fear, distance, and a handful of mountain tribes with long rifles and deep pride. For over a century, this silent war, the Great Game, would continue. Russia would keep pressing south. Britain would keep fortifying India, and Afghanistan would remain the chessboard, forever bloodied, forever broken. But it all started here, with a single war, a single retreat, and a single survivor on a dying horse. If this hidden story shook your understanding of empire, power, and paranoia, then smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell for more shocking tales from history's shadows. From forgotten wars to secret deals, we uncover the truth that was buried on purpose. Stick with us, and you'll never see history the same way again.